Schaefer International Gallery. I'm Nida Bangater, Director of Exhibitions, and this is Jonathan Clark, Exhibits Coordinator. We're excited to bring you 3 solo shows as Abstractionx3. This exhibition features 3 artists from Hawaii: Don Bernshouse from Maui, Debra Drexler from Oahu, and Tom Lieber from Kauai. I have watched the careers of these artists for many years, and I'm so thrilled to have them together in the space, which you're about to see with the walkthrough with the artists. And you're also going to see this broad spectrum of abstraction and how they approached it for these exhibitions that they've created.
Well, we'll be featuring all 3 of the artists today, and they'll be in a lively conversation where they'll be discussing their work and their differing approaches to abstraction and sharing ideas with one another. So we look forward to hearing what they have to say, and we hope that you'll enjoy this presentation.
I've been painting for 50 years, and half of the work in this exhibition is fitting in with the segment that I'm normally painting, and it's an evolution of abstracting the human figure and bringing it down to the lower torso, kind of. So you'll see in most of the work, this kind of V shape that it's an expression of that lower center in the body, which is where one goes when they're meditating. That seems to be the main focus for me right now, is that I start with that. I know that that's going to be in a painting. I don't have a concrete plan because as I'm starting a new canvas, I'm just working around, scraping off, erasing, putting more paint on, and the composition begins to form itself, and the subject begins to form itself. And you'll notice in all my work, there's different moods, or there's some are active and energetic and hot colored, and others are soothing and calm. And that kind of just happens as I'm painting. The painting starts to have a life of its own, and I kind of support that and follow it in the process. These larger paintings, like the one behind me, I did in homage to the Hawaiian Islands, and there's still the kind of V shapes in all of these, but they're more angular, and I was more concerned about just imagining the beginning of the elements that are here coming together.
My first question is, before we started talking, you were talking about a hesitancy to talk about art because of it defining you too much, or putting you into a pigeonhole. And it made me think about abstraction in general, because one thing I think about abstraction is it eludes definition. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that desire to not be pigeonholed or to not be too defined by something.
Well, I think that's why I am an abstract painter, so that it's not so rigidly interpreted. And even the process is not formed. I like the openness of just being able to explore with the paint, and the search becomes the painting. So it's not like I think that the actual process is elusive. I'd like the paintings to just be that free. When I moved to Kauai full-time in 2000, the horizon became a large part of the format, just to acknowledge that. So environment does affect it affects me in all the paintings, I guess, really. But I think that as I've developed this work, most of my paintings now are vertical, because I feel like that relates more to a human standing there, or it has a humanness presence about it, as opposed to a landscape. So I kind of stay away from horizontals, because I'm more interested in connecting with the viewer or having that experience that's more related to their body, to my body. There's some monotypes in the exhibition, and I do those. Those are quick. The paintings generally have like 20 layers of paint on them, 20 sessions or more. Some go on for years, some happen in a month, but they're definitely labored and difficult to make. The monotypes happen in about an hour, and I can come into the to a print studio and lay down the paint and do some pushing around, and it's kind of easy, and I can work on variations on ideas quickly and get a finished product so that I can see how would that look with this zipping up this way, and is it balanced, is it centered or off center. So I enjoy that process.
Tom talking about the works being vertical, anatomical, I guess. But I was glad that he suggested that these do have a landscape feel to them, because they do have a landscape feel for me, and you're alluding to them relating to the Hawaiian Islands, and when you look at them, they do have a kind of chaotic formingness of what created the islands. They're cosmic, I think. When I look at them, they're marvelously spacious and a sense of turmoil, I think.
Yeah, like a sense of becoming is how I felt about it. In regards to the idea of definition and density, like in this painting, this black became almost too massive and dense, so I had to come back in with this blue, and it was just it's kind of risky to have the painting almost finished and then have to change it, but that's kind of how this works, is that this pushes in and it almost it gives it less power as the negative space comes in here, and so that helps to depower it from overwhelming the painting as a big black force. And I also put this line in at the end, which kind of just creates when you see the painting in real life, it's almost these dots and a few lines go way back in space. So instead of being a giant rock or mass, it becomes an open, almost like a black hole. And these paintings were done pre-COVID, so I was getting up at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning to work when it was super quiet. Now it's just quiet everywhere all the time. But I would get up at 3 and 4 and work, and work 3 or 4 paintings at a time. And I think this idea of the search in my paintings, or when I look at my paintings in the process, I'm looking at what bothers me when I come into the studio, and then I'll start to work with that. And that, as I made that adjustment with that blue coming in, it depowered that force, and that created the composition. So I didn't really conceive how it was going to look. It just happened through what was bothering me, too heavy, too dense, too strong, and then make the adjustment And then that always leads to somewhere else.
You mentioned that your time in New York was pretty brief. You didn't really relate to New York, that you emerged more out of the West Coast abstraction scene and movement that was happening. Do you want to?
I think it was just that I was at Illinois and I met artists. They had visiting artists come in, and the visiting artists from New York at that time were pretty intense. And the artists coming in from the West Coast were like poets. And I mean, they were painters, but they were gentle poets, humanists. And I just went, shit, I'm not going to go to New York. So I went to the West Coast. It wasn't people I loved, I became friends with. Yeah, it was a different vibe. It wasn't really their paint, their style, because the West Coast wasn't as strong as the New York art scene. It was more just the
atmosphere. And
the humanism. It was the humanism of the art scene I felt on the West Coast, especially Northern California. I didn't really go down to LA till recently. I can't lose my center, so I'm just kind of start from where I'm at each day and in each painting as it takes its life, to try to read it clearly and make an expression with that. Because meditating every day is different, so kind of go with what's there each day. Similar to painting.
Just to talk a little bit about my journey as a painter, I actually started as an abstract painter. It was abstraction that captured me. And a lot of what captured me about abstraction was that sense of expansion, was that sense of it talking about something beyond what everyday experience is, almost a transcendent experience, or connecting a little bit deeper with what it means to be human. In my early painting, I was doing a lot of large-scale abstraction. Kind of my early work was abstract expressionism that I did in the 70s and 80s. And then when I got into graduate school, I began to explore content. I began thinking about feminist content in my work and narrative pieces. And always, though, through the development of narrative, it was like what happened outside the figure that was interesting to me. Like I would just kind of take off on a space outside the figure and allow that improvisation to go completely abstractly. So the narrative work culminated in a project that I did that I worked on for about 6 years, called Gauguin Zombie, and I was very fortunate that it showed at Honolulu Museum, then it came here, then it was my first show that I did in New York at White Box's Annex in New York. Certain things happened that like that narrative felt so complete, it felt finished to me. I also, around that time, that Gauguin Zombie finished around 2005, 2007, I started becoming a daily meditator. And then the daily meditation was taking me back into a place of seeing light, seeing color, this kind of kinesthetic connection with the paint and the material. So this kind of internal process that shifted me back to my roots as an abstract painter. But I think I came back to it a little bit differently. That one thing that I was thinking about with it was, what does it mean to be an abstract painter in the 21st century? Like, how do I embody what abstraction is today, rather than repeating the abstraction I necessarily did before? So I think there are some things that are similar and some things that are different. I think as human beings, we all need this connection to something material, to something spiritual, to something beyond ourselves. And I think there is a directness with painting that helps us go beyond the digital world, the flatness of the world. There's a sense of a connection with materiality, and I think that's why painting is coming back so strongly now in terms of the discourse in art, that there is something that we need as human beings with something about the realness of painting, about its ancient materiality.
Maybe talk a little bit about some of the work maybe that has influenced you. I mean, you've alluded to Expressionism, and you can see some of that. But, you know, when I look at some of the flat, soft areas, you know, they make me think a little bit of pop art.
Yeah, I would say there's so many artists who've influenced me. It's you know, hard to even list them. I mean, Frankenthaler, obviously, with the transparency and the application. Like, I often work on the floor, but then I put it back up again. You know, de Kooning and Hoffman were really early influences. I would say Matisse is an influence too, in terms of flatness and color interactions, you know, in terms of kind of pivotal influences.
Did you work on this on the wall and on the floor? Or?
Yes.
And were they stretched when you?
Yeah, because that's how, I mean, they're so thick in some places, like right through here.
Yeah.
You know, where that wouldn't really hold up if I were working with unstretched. So yeah, I'm constantly, it's a fairly physical process. I'm constantly going from up to down, floor to wall or table to wall, you know, with them, and going back and forth between them. Yeah, so recently I've been working more with acrylic than oil, although sometimes I will underpaint with acrylic and add a layer of oil, because I'm interested in the different viscosities and textures and matteness and gloss that can happen with the paint. You know, like there's something like this where I try to get the paint as matte as possible and flat as possible, playing off an edge where there's more of a texture, or something like this where there's more of a pour. So the idea is everything is really densely layered. You know, whether it's layered with like 6 coats of a matte color to get it flat, or whether it's got more of a wash that's been gone over with brush work or pour work. You know, in some places, like I work with the impasto surface, so it comes off the canvas about that much. And this one here, you know, the golds, there's like 4 or 5 different golds here. So when you look through, you know, you're seeing a surface or a surface of history. So I've started working more with the acrylic paints, just because they can do things that the oils do. They have like glazing, like Golden has glazing mediums that can mimic the look of an oil. But then they also do strange things that oils can't do. You know, and they give this surface quality, like this is a weird surface quality here, which is like it's a matte application, it's kind of cracked to reveal something underneath. So there are some aspects of the paint. You know, I have no idea when I started painting what it's going to end up looking like. I have a general palette and some general forms that I tend to bring in, but it's very much about responding to what I'm seeing and pushing and trying to see something different that I haven't seen before. So I'm constantly trying to push the material to do things that become a little bit mysterious to me, that they're responding in a way that is not expected or predictable. Or Hawaii influences the work visually through the richness of the color. I'd say my colors are very tropical colors that you see in the plants, you see in the landscape here. So I do think that feeds into it. I would say I also see those colors when I meditate. I have a bit of synesthesia where I close my eyes sometimes and I see shape, I see color, and I don't paint exactly what that is, but there is like this really feeling connection between color internally in me and what I experience. So I would say like the quality of light here, you know, the luminosity, I try to get that luminosity through the layering of my work. That definitely influences the work. I'd say what New York brings to it is that conversation that happens with other abstract painters there and that community. And I'd say the hard edges came into my work from New York. Like I was more of a gestural abstract artist, but then I started bringing in the hard edge, and maybe that relates to the urban experience a little bit, or the boundary between like the soft flowy part and the edge and that.
Well, you're a true colorist, where I consider myself like a kind of a tonalist, but your color is amazing and
Thank you.
makes it does have a feminine aspect to it that I think is awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
When I finished architecture school, I moved directly to New York. And it wasn't long before I became engaged in the art scene there, particularly in sculpture. There didn't seem to be any way to engage in painting at that time. And I think that frustration was recognized by a number of the artists that I came to know somewhat later. So we found a way to make art by making sculpture, by making the painting more three-dimensional. And those other artists that I came to know and felt allied with were subsequently described as minimalists. The influences that I had at that time, which had worked on me a long time, long before I actually started making sculpture, because there was no opportunity to make art while I was in architecture school, because the curriculum was so demanding. I felt very relieved by the time I got to New York and the degree had been done and I could engage in other things. I think the influence for the early minimalist work was basically Brancusi and the Kaua'i-based of David Smith. I think that was later somewhat corroborated with by some of the other minimalists that I subsequently met, like Carl Andre. He acknowledged Brancusi as well. He also recognized Noguchi, which at that time I didn't care too much about. I think the effort was to try to create sculpture that was, as always, I guess, the anxiety of influence, as Harold Bloom says, trying to find a new way out of the work of the abstract expressionist and the prior sculptors that were American and European, Picasso and so forth. The works in here involving the heads and so forth reflect a kind of mental space, I think, conflicted and strained or stressed maybe in some way. Some of them, I think, have a little bit of Asian influence. I really do like Asian art, particularly Japanese art. I love calligraphy. I have many books on Japanese and even Chinese calligraphy. I like the Japanese work. It's a little edgier, seems a little more aggressive. It is a kind of, it's a kind of art meditation, I think. I don't think of much else. I just think about what's in front of me, and a lot of that is intuitive. It's not programmed or anything. I might just pour some water on the paper and then take some ink lines and, as Thomas suggested, and Deborah as well, you go from there. Whatever it suggests, you proceed along that path.
And I'm just wondering about the transition from this kind of austere minimalism that you did in your early career to these, very emotive, personal, intimate sculptures and images that seem like the antithesis of minimalism.
I think that's true.
Like how did that journey happen from minimalism?
I seem to adopt a more kind of humanist viewpoint, and as I said, the artists that interested me then were, I thought of a more humanist bent. There was also the need I felt, for the art to reflect the environment that I was living in. The 20th century, as we all know, is a pretty horrific time period with wars and massacres and what all, and that seemed to seep into the work as well, establishing images, and so like the works there, the ceramic works, some of those pieces reflect that that nature, works that were kind of ruins, maybe from places that had been bombed, or maybe they were works that were existing 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. All of that, seemed without much conscious effort, just seemed to evolve into these images. It was just like picking up some clay and pushing it around, and something evolves. Kind of like Tom was talking about with his paintings.
Can you talk about the piece that almost looks like there's something exploding out of the head with the pink and the yellow? I've been staring at that a lot as you've been talking.
Yeah,
too.
I think I did a number of works then. I think that relates to my wife when she was dying, and I felt like I could sense the spirit of her leaving, and in some cases I saw it as my own spirit being separated from her. It was a fairly excruciating time, I think.
It's a really powerful image. I can see everything you're saying. They feel like they're looking for some light in the midst of pain and darkness.
Yeah, it's, what was it? It was like Faulkner said something about, human life was about endurance, about enduring, and there's probably some of that. I'm rather pessimistic about things in general, but I try to live optimistically. I want to be happy. I don't want to be sad. And
It's funny, they don't tell you about endurance and all that in the beginning.
No, they do not. You learn that's,
Yeah.